Thanks
Welcome
very much for that,
everyone
Bridget.
to,
Thanks for having
oh
me.
sorry, Doi, I'll just do the
Sorry, go on.
acknowledgement of country. Um, Welcome to this webinar, Everyday Issues Relating to Motor Vehicles. My name is Bridget Barker and I work in the Community Legal Education branch of Legal Aid New South Wales. I'm here today with your presenter, Doi Pham from the Legal Aid New South Wales Refugee Service. Before we start the presentation, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are broadcasting from today. For me, that is the Widjabul-Wyalbul people of the Bundjalung Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Thank you, Doi. I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Bridget. Sorry for the interruption before. So good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everybody had a good lunch break and has come back very refreshed for our very exciting webinar on everyday issues relating to cars and motor vehicles. So my name is Dewey. Bridget, as Bridget said, I'm a lawyer from the Refugee Service here at Legal Aid. We are based in Fairfield within the community here. The Refugee Service is a specialist service who helps pretty much any refugee who has resettled in Australia for the last 6 years with everyday issues with civil, family and crime. Now, we are a pretty small team, but we are run statewide, and we do run outreach services, not just in Metro Sydney, but outside in North and South and West New South Wales as well. Sorry, one second, Bridget, I've got technical difficulties. Okay, so I'm going to pop to the next slide, please, Bridget. So when I was asked to do this presentation, I thought, God, there's a lot of issues that we could cover with cars, but I thought the best way we could approach it was some of the common issues that I guess I and my team see here at the Refugee Service and at Legal Aid in general. They might not seem like, I guess, expansive topics, but they do really affect each of our clients when they do resettle here in Australia. So I will cover, not exhaustively, but in enough detail, driver's licenses in New South Wales, car registrations, car insurance, car accidents, and some common traffic offences. Now, there are hundreds of traffic offences in New South Wales, so I won't cover all of them, just some of the hits and highlights. And of course, we are open to questions. We might leave questions till the end, just because it will probably help with the flow of the presentation this afternoon.
So I'll launch a poll now. The question in this poll is, what is the maximum penalty for driving without a New South Wales licence? The choices are $696, $899, $1,498, or $2,200. As I said earlier, if you click on your choice, that's how you respond to the poll.
Hopefully the answers are coming through, Bridget.
Yeah, I just can't see anything. Would people mind also just typing into the question box to let me know that you're able to respond to the poll? Okay, we'll just close that poll off now and I'll share the results.
Oh, congratulations. So a lot of people got that option D, option 4 correct there. So the maximum penalty for driving without a license is $2,200. That's just imposed by a court. So it was a bit of a trick question. The usual penalty is $899 if a police officer pulls you over and issues you a fine. Now, the reason why we ran that poll was just to get you started on thinking about driver's licenses. Something I hear, which is surprising or perhaps unsurprising from my clients when they resettle here in Sydney, is they're surprised with how many rules there are, especially about driver's licenses. I remember one gentleman who told me he'd been driving since as young as he could remember, as long as his feet reached the pedal. I didn't ask how old he was, but young enough, I think. So you can see that the rules, there are more relaxed rules in some countries. So clients are always surprised when they come here. So it kind of turns to like a very common issue that we see and I see for newly arrived refugees, is that they will use their overseas licenses, usually for quite a while. And they come to me and say, oh, a police officer has pulled me over and has given me a fine for using my overseas license. And more often than not, it's because they've been using it for a bit too long. There is a rule in New South Wales, not just for overseas arrivals, but for people who've come from interstate, that they do need to apply for a New South Wales license within 3 months of resettling here in New South Wales. Now, if your client is from overseas, there are specific rules for certain countries. So you might find one country transferring to a New South Wales license might ask that a client resit their driving test. For other countries, they might just transfer over to a full license. So I always recommend clients to check with Services New South Wales just to see what rules apply to them. This next slide is kind of just a refresher on getting your driver's license. It's been many years since I've gotten my learner's license. I'm just going to wait for the slide to pop up. There we go. So when I was redoing this slide for this presentation, I realized that a lot of the rules had changed. So in some ways, it was a good refresher for myself as well to know what to expect when a teenage client comes in and asks me about their learner's license. So I won't go through I won't read off the slide, but I'll just highlight probably the biggest parts of each stage in your license. So learner's license is still the first stage. Then you have your red Ps or the P1 license, P2, and then your full license. Now, there is another license which I will go on to the next page, but it's not relevant here. There is a lot of fees involved. Again, something that my clients always remind me, it's very expensive to get your license. So for your learner's license, you're looking at a fee of about $26 for the license, and there's a test fee as well to sit and pass that first driver knowledge test. My clients always say it's a lot of hours on the red Ps, on your learner's license to complete the 120 hours. But unfortunately, it's just something that most people have to do unless they are over 25 and don't have to log the hours. At each stage, there is an eyesight test, and there is you do have to provide identity documents, which in itself, identity documents doesn't seem like an obvious problem, but with a lot of my clients, there are sometimes problems with getting identities. So not just my clients, but other people's clients. I'm sure a lot of workers in the community will have issues where people just can't obtain any form of ID, or they've lost their passport, or they've lost their immigration card. So there is also that requirement to provide ID for licenses. Now, after the few years of getting to your full license, hopefully a lot of your clients have been able to get across the testing and they are competent drivers. One thing, again, that a lot of my clients do ask me about is when they are on their green peas or they're red peas. There's so many rules with passengers and the car types that they are restricted to. I always recommend clients come speak to one of us or somebody in the community just to be across the rules, because unfortunately red peas and green pea provisional drivers, they do get picked up by police a bit more often, so we always try our best to educate the community. Now, if we could just pop to the next slide, please, Bridget. So there is the additional license called a professional drivers, which some people might have heard about. It really is just there for taxi drivers, bus drivers, or people who on a paid and full-time basis do transport goods. So truck drivers also have truck licenses. But the way demerit points work, and sorry if this is quite basic knowledge to most people listening in today, is that everybody starts with 0 demerit points, and once you accrue demerit points, usually from traffic offences, once you hit that limit, so say for example you are on your green peas there in the middle, and you have been caught with a mobile phone, that's 5 points. If they have another speeding offence, which puts them over to 7 points, their licence is automatically suspended. And that's just a suspension based on the demerit points. If they do 30 kilometres over and lose points, they will usually serve 2 suspension periods. But I find this table I always show to my clients when I do community education, just for them. Most people take out their phones actually and take photos of these tables, because it's a good reminder for them to see how many points each license does hold for the person. Now, there are, of course, again, sorry if this is basic, there are speed limits as well on the provisional and learner's licenses. Some of my clients have been in trouble in the past because they have been going 100 while on their P1 license. So it is, I think, really important to tell the community and educate your own clients that there are demerit points and there are speed limits as well on each of the licenses. So I know it's a lot of information, Bridget. I'm okay if there are questions that have come through. I'm happy to take some, because I know it's kind of like a wall of information.
It is a lot of information. We don't have any questions at the moment. Okay. Would you like me to launch the next poll?
Yeah, we'll just launch into the next poll then.
Okay. Okay, everybody. The question for this poll is, what is the penalty for driving an unregistered and uninsured motor vehicle? And your choices there are $704, $1,199, $1,408, or $3,300. I have to say I'm learning a lot this afternoon as well. I'll just give you a little bit of time.
These polls come from client and some personal experience. I won't tell you which one's which.
Okay, I'll just close off the poll now. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to submit their answers. And then we'll share the results.
So it's actually C, or the third option, the blue option there. So this is a bit of a trick question. There are 2 penalties in here. So there is 1 penalty for an unregistered vehicle of $704, and another penalty for an uninsured vehicle, which is another $704. And I'll regale you a story, I think, of my brother later on, which is why I know about this and why he received this fine. Maybe I've just jumped the gun there and told people. But we'll move on to, I think, the next section on car registrations. Again, it seems quite basic, but I find well, actually, you know what? For myself, car registrations can be is very complicated because there's so many rules and little tick boxes to tick off. And so I always put myself in the position of my clients who've come from a refugee-based country who have bought their first car. They're usually, I can think of one client as a young lad, bought his first car, very, very proud of it. He just had no idea what to do in terms of the registration. Now, a general rule of thumb in New South Wales is if you buy a new car or a car from somebody else, or a new car, or if they buy it from interstate, there is an obligation to transfer the registration of that car into your name within 14 days. If it does exceed the 14 days, there could be extra costs on top, and there is kind of like an administrative delay as well. Now, you do have to pay stamp duty or 3% transfer fee on each transfer. So that's something to keep in mind as well for your clients if they are purchasing a new vehicle, that there is that extra tax on top. It's really, really important, I think, to tell Services New South Wales so that they can ensure that the transfer goes smoothly, and you're laying the foundation to be able to properly register your car when you bought a new car. Now, I am skipping a little bit ahead by mentioning CTP, or your compulsory third-party insurance, but this kind of comes hand in hand with car registrations because you do have to take this out when you buy a car in New South Wales. And just onto the next bit, New South Wales has this, I think, a very convenient system where they kind of color code the sorts of slips you need to get. So administrative tick-offs. So the green slip is something that I think everybody is very used to because that's also referred to as your compulsory third-party insurance. The other two are the blue slip. So this doesn't happen very often, but I've had to do it once for a car that I bought interstate that had been unregistered, I think for about 6 months, that car. But if the car has been unregistered for 3 months or more, then you are required to obtain a blue slip from a mechanic just to certify that the car is still roadworthy and registerable. You will always see these blue slips come up for cars purchased overseas, pretty much. Now, the last slip is the pink slip, and this is for cars that are usually 5 years or older. For new cars, you don't need to get a pink slip. They cost about $40. I did mine recently for $42, $43, and that's just to say again your car is roadworthy, and it's a requirement to be able to get your car registered. Now, I foreshadowed before that my poor brother did get fined quite a bit of money, $14.08, and this happened, I think, probably about 5 years ago. I remember him calling me and he told me that he'd received a massive fine from a police officer. I think back then it was about $1,300, but for today's purposes, we'll say $14.08. The police officer pulled him over and said, "Look, son, your car's unregistered," because they do the scan and his number plates showed that he was unregistered. And he was really confused. He told the officer and told me afterwards that he was certain he had paid his registration fee online. So this was in that period where Services was transitioning from the stickers on the cars to online registration and whatnot. So he was certain he'd paid it online. And he even showed me the receipt. So we kind of had to dig to see what had happened. And my younger brother, he can be a bit careless sometimes, but he honestly did try. What we found out was that he had actually paid for his green slip, the compulsory third party insurance. And now most listeners might know that you have to pay your green slip, and then once you pay your green slip, that's automatically sent to Services New South Wales, and that's when you get the chance to then pay for your registration. So he'd done the green slip but forgot to do his registration online. So what happened was, because his car remained unregistered and he was driving around for 4 months without any registration. After 3 months at that time, because there was no registration, the green slip lapsed. So then his car also became uninsured. So he received the double whammy, the $708 for each offence, and it was a very big sum of money for him back then. So I helped him out a bit with paying that, and I told him, "You got to make sure you pay both, brother." So he's made sure that he has in the future. It's an expensive mistake, I think, to make. But part of the reason why I talk about car registrations and my brother's story is that it kind of is um, a nice segue, as much as a segue can be, into car insurance, because that's the other thing that really trips up my clients and a lot of our clients is on top of all the driving rules, the car registration rules, the license rules, there's also car insurance. I've had many clients say to me, Dewey, my car's insured. I don't understand why my insurance company isn't helping me out here. I think to myself it's an insurance company, but that's another story. But clients come to me and say, look, I thought my car was insured, been in an accident and the insurer won't pay. Before we launch into the different types, and again, sorry if this is quite basic, but the basic premise of car insurance is that you are paying a company who is saying, we will protect you from some of the risks of you owning your own car, but you have to pay a premium each year. So I always have to explain what a premium is to my clients if they don't understand what it is, and that can be paid and monthly or yearly. Generally, if you pay yearly, you will save a little bit of money, about 10%. Now, insurance doesn't cover, depending on the type of insurance, insurance doesn't cover every single thing that could happen to the car. And that's why there's 3 or about 4 different levels of insurance, but I'll cover the 3 on the next slide. So then hopefully everybody is already familiar with this, and if you're not, then hopefully we can add some extra information for you today. Okay, so you'll see that I've already mentioned CTP, or compulsory third-party insurance, or the green slip. Now again, I mentioned before, this is the only compulsory one. You can get away with just paying this. Each year I find it increases. So it's a costly, I think, exercise to own a car. And that's why I think a lot of my clients and a lot of my family and friends only have CTP for a car that might not be worth the world, but they still need to pay this third-party insurance. And what it covers is pretty much just injuries to yourself or to a third party who's in an accident. It doesn't cover property damage. So it doesn't happen often, but I've had one client who thought that paying just the bare minimum would also cover damage for both cars. Unfortunately, it's not. If you're paying just third party, you are running the risk of any accident, and not just big damage, but small damage as well. Nothing is covered by your green slip provider. Now, the second one is, I think, the bee's knees of insurance. So it's comprehensive insurance. I do remind my clients that not all comprehensive insurance is equal. There are some insurance companies do try and vary it a tiny bit, but generally it will cover damage to your car as well as the other party's car in the event of an accident. So irrespective of fault. Now I've given this talk to the community for some years now, and the feedback that I get from a lot of my clients is it's really expensive. And for my own car insurance, it is really expensive. It of course depends on your car and your driving history, but generally if you have a mid-range car and you don't have many offences or any offences or claims in the past, it's still an expensive exercise to go through to get everything insured. But I have seen some clients who have had the opportunity to purchase comprehensive insurance, and I know that they have, in an accident, it does help clients so much to have an insurer on their side to chase up the other party in the accident. And more often than not, a lot of people tend not to admit fault in an accident, or it is somewhere in the middle where it is partly both parties' fault. So I always recommend for clients, if they can afford it, to do comprehensive insurance. If they can't, then I always say, look, third-party property insurance is also available. That, in a nutshell, means that your car, so that your client's car or your own car isn't covered, but the other driver's car is covered if there is an accident. I can already think off the top of my head of a few clients who have crashed into quite expensive Mercedes and BMWs, and one client actually had third party. So I was incredibly happy for her that she had third party insurance. But the risk, of course, is that if you write off your car or your client writes off their car, then they won't be, and their car won't be covered in an accident. Now, a fourth category that I didn't put on the slide, which isn't as common, but it sometimes pops up, is fire and theft. So you can have like another category of insurance where if your car is lost in a fire or is stolen, then your insurer will cover that as well. But it's not as common, I see, but it's always an option, I think, for clients. Give me 1 second, just check my slide. Okay, and so I might just pop onto the next slide. Now, the duty of disclosure, or now the duty to not misrepresent. Sorry for the boring legal language, but what it basically means is that so last year there was a duty for yourself if you were purchasing an insurance policy, not just car insurance, that you had to disclose quite fully pretty much your history of any claims, of any accidents, and it was quite a high threshold on what you had to tell the insurer. Now, in some ways, it was your responsibility, your full responsibility to tell the insurer. Now, the Royal Commission, the Financial Services Royal Commission last year, actually looked at this duty of disclosure and said, "Hang on, it's pretty hard for some clients to be able to meet this duty to disclose everything under the sun to the insurer." So what they found was that some insurers were taking advantage of this and saying, Mr. or Mrs. Smith hasn't disclosed a very obscure thing, therefore we are declining their insurance claim. So the Royal Commission actually found, to better protect our clients, they've kind of lowered the bar a tiny bit, or quite a bit actually, compared to a duty of disclosure. And they said, look, you now have a reasonable duty to not misrepresent information that's provided to the insurer. Now, I know it sounds a little bit technical and probably isn't too much of a difference, but what it really means is that the duty isn't as high. So if an insurer decides to not ask specific questions, they can't then rely on asking the wrong questions to refuse a claim. It's only a new duty to not misrepresent. It's only been around, I think, for maybe about a year now. We'll see how it kind of plays out in practice, I think, in the future. But what it means, it's a good thing for our clients. Mind you, this is a very hard thing to explain to my clients. I just really have to tell them, look, for all intents and purposes, they're quite similar duties, but you just need to be really honest with your insurer. So I can think of one client who had been in a car accident with his very cool car, worth quite a bit. And he said to me, Dewey, I took out this insurance policy with the insurer because he told me he could insure me, but now he said no, because I didn't tell them everything. And I said, oh, what didn't you tell them? He said, oh, look, they asked me if I had any speeding fines. And he said, look, I had one, but I don't really remember when it was. So once we got through his paperwork, the insurer actually said, you had a speeding fine 2 months before taking out your insurance policy. And he said, yeah, I did, that's when it was. But he told me, oh, look, I tried to get insurance with somebody else and I told them I had a speeding fine and they said no. So I said to him, look, you do have to be honest with your insurers, because then they can rely on your information to then refuse your claim, which is kind of that last point on the page. I always say there's no point in paying a premium if it won't cover you in an accident. Sure, you might be paying a little bit more for the premium because of accidents or claims, but you just need to be honest, I think, with the insurers. So that's my take-home point, I think, for insurance.
Thanks, Joy. I'll launch the next poll now. Okay, this question is, have you been in a car accident?
Hopefully this one isn't too hard. How do I tick yes?
Yeah, I would have to tick yes too. Okay, I'll close that off now. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to enter their answer. I'll share the results.
Oh, the lucky few that haven't been in a car accident.
Yes.
It's most people I know or spoken to have been in some sort of car accident. Usually not anything major, but something minor. But this next section, I just want to talk about car accidents. Now, unfortunately, I think you could spend a whole day talking about car accidents, but I will try and again just give you the hits and highlights of things to do straight after an accident, things to look out for in the future. There's a whole process in going to court, but we'll kind of take it step by step. But what I always say to my clients is, if you do get in a car accident, firstly, just make sure that everybody is safe. There are some drivers who will get you to get out of the car straight away and take photos, but if this is a busy highway, there could be a further accident. So always be safe, firstly. Now, these are kind of just general steps. It's not gospel, but I've always found that this is really helpful, this list, just to follow right after a car accident. There is a requirement to exchange details after an accident, so you do need to get the other driver's details. So this includes their name, their contact mobile phone number, their license details, and car registration. In this day and age, most people just take a photo of the other driver's license, and that you'll capture most of the information. You just have to make sure that you do jot down their mobile number or contact number. Now, the next bit, everybody will always tell you, take photographs. So this includes videos as well. I've watched many videos of car accidents from my clients who have been filming for 20 minutes. I think, God, that's a long time. You only need to take a few photos of the accident spot, and just so that you can show where the vehicles entered or where the collision came from. Just enough photographs and 1 or 2 videos, I think, is always good. Now, getting details from witnesses, I think, is also really important. Generally, a third-party witness is the best. So a bystander who's been walking by and they see the car accident, they are probably your best witnesses. So as you can imagine, most people might have a passenger in their car and they will be a witness. Sure, they are a witness, but it might be a bit more biased if they've been in the accident or they're traveling with you or your client in an accident. So a third-party witness is always, I think, much more helpful. If you can do this as soon as possible after the accident, I always find that's really, really helpful as well. And that's because generally if you do wait long, 1, you might lose the witnesses, but 2, if you get a statement from a witness and it's been some weeks, memories fade, recollections do fade. So if you can get that from them sooner rather than later, it'd always be good. Now the last 2 are optional, but I always find they are quite useful. You probably won't get a chance to do it at the scene of the accident, but once you get home or your client gets home or they have a moment to themselves, I always say take some notes because, again, memory changes, especially after a car accident if it's been quite big. It can be quite traumatic for some clients. So if they can write down notes about whatever details that they know or can remember about the accident, and just notes about the damage or what the other driver said. So if the other driver admits fault, and this happens quite often, a driver in an accident might admit fault, and then later on they take that back. It's good to take the notes to say, oh, this is when the driver said, it was their fault. You also want to write down the time and the date, how good visibility was at the time. So anything that I think is relevant to the accident conditions. Now, the last
I'll
one is
just
draw a
let you
diagram.
know. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry I've
No,
interrupted
go on.
you.
No, go on.
We've just had an audience comment. I've been a witness to an incident, and the person who was at fault, who broke the law by going the wrong way in a one-way street, threatened and called people to threaten. It was a big experience.
That's quite the experience, and that's when police might get involved. If there are threats and you do feel genuinely scared for your safety, then that's a police complaint any day of the week. And it doesn't look very good for the other driver if he's threatening witnesses, I'll tell you that. So that last point as well, sounds again silly, but I always recommend drawing a diagram of the cross street or the street or how the cars collided. I recommend this because sometimes people don't take photographs, sometimes people don't take videos. So if they don't have that, then at least they have something contemporaneous for them to rely on, or to at least just refresh their own memory on how the accident occurred. And you know what, it really helps me as a solicitor if a client comes in and they pull out a diagram. Never happened before, but I know it would really help me because we will usually sit down. If they don't have a diagram, they will draw it out in front of me, and I'm like, okay, I understand now. It's much easier than going on Google Maps and spinning the maps around to try and figure out which way was which. Now, some of my clients will say that police attended the scene, or sometimes they say, I wanted police to attend the scene, but they didn't. Now, most of the time, this is just my personal experience, but some of my clients, police tend not to attend the scene if there's nothing that serious has happened. But clients do, and for us, we must call police if there is somebody injured or trapped in the car. So generally, of course, fire brigade or the ambulance also turn up there. Because if it's that serious, then generally police will need to be there to direct traffic or deal with debris or whatnot on the road. The other circumstances are if the car needs to be towed away. So again, that's a very serious accident. I think most cars you can at least generally drive away or at least move it out of the way into the shoulder of the lane. And the last one is if somebody believes or if the client believes that the other driver is drunk or under the influence of drugs. So that's when it kind of encroaches into that criminal space where police do have, I think, much more jurisdiction. Now, I touched on the fact that somebody could be injured or trapped in the car. If someone is injured, there is a scheme in New South Wales where you can call CIRA, so the State Insurance Regulatory Authority. They have an assistance hotline that connects to somebody's CTP, their green slip. The number's up there on the screen. Not many people know about this, but you can call them, and you need to call pretty quickly as well, within 28 days of the accident, to start a claim. And that just gets the process going, because if you do leave it a bit longer after that, it can cause delays for all parties, and as well as CIRA. Just let me double check something. Sorry. Now, again, not many clients know about this program, I've found, but the other issue that I've had in the past is that I have had clients traveling to work who've been in car accidents and they've been injured. And so one question I did receive was that, can I receive workers' comp at the same time as the CTP claim? And the short answer is no. So workers' comp, if clients are eligible for it, will supersede whatever claim or damages they can get from the CTP side. But generally the workers' comp will run first, and then once that runs out, then your CTP claim for your injuries will kind of transfer onto the next stage there. Now, I find with a lot of my clients, I find there's two camps. There's one camp of clients who take too many photos and videos and collect too much evidence, but there's also the other end of the spectrum where, and this is no fault of their own, they're in so much shock or they are quite traumatized that they fail to collect much evidence at all. I always hope that clients at least get the registration details, contact details of the other driver, and then they can think about getting the other evidence as soon as possible afterwards. So what I always find is that's when you can draw a diagram with the clients. That's when you can contact witnesses to make a statement about what they saw. One thing my clients usually come in with is a quote for the damage of their motor vehicle. So Joe Blow, smash repairer down the street, has quoted them $5,000 for a dent in the bumper, and they are trying to claim that off the other driver. And of course, the other driver is a bit like, I don't want to pay $5,000 for a scratch on your bumper. So I always say to clients, sure, it's a good quote for you, but you want to collect at least a few quotes so it's a bit fair. So they might go to another smash repairer who will quote them $2,000. If you have 3 quotes, then you can ask the other driver, and you have to be reasonable to pay a reasonable amount of money for the damage to the bumper. There's no magic number, I think, with the quotes. Some people will say 2, some people will say 4. I say 3, but anything more than 1, I think is I think helpful, just to be fair with all the parties. So this can happen as well the other way around. If your client or yourself, if you've been in a car accident and you receive a quote, you want it to be fair. Now, hopefully, after an accident, both parties are insured, or at least one party is insured. You hope it's your client, because the next slide kind of talks about fault. A lot of my clients will tell me that it was the other driver's fault, or they will tell me that it's their fault. One of the things I'm glad that they've come to talk to me about it, or a solicitor. One of the things I try and explain is that it's not always clear cut on whose fault it is for the damage to a car, because there's also contributory fault in car accidents. So it might be split 50-50, it might be split 40-60 if you go to court, which is what a magistrate might find. But generally, if a driver is at fault, say the other driver is at fault and your client doesn't have insurance, this is where it gets a bit tricky, and unfortunately is a very common scenario for myself in my practice. I always try and talk to my clients and say, what's the best way to negotiate? Because a lot of my clients will say, oh, look, let's go to court. And I think court's hard. Court, I've always thought, is kind of your last resort, which I'll go through in a bit. But you want to try and negotiate and settle this accident in, I think, the less time-consuming and most efficient way is probably the best. It might mean that they might not get as much from the payment of damages, but there's other things to kind of consider, I think, down the track. Now, if, and this sometimes happens, if a client or a driver is able to agree with the other driver on certain money to be paid for damages, and both parties are happy with it, get it in writing. I always recommend clients, if they need to find a way to write it, like a settlement deed, or just some written agreement to say everything has been paid and nobody can pursue the other person anymore, come see a lawyer. Come see one of us or any lawyer at Legal Aid who can kind of guide you through that process. Now, unfortunately, more often than not, I find that drivers will tend to dispute fault or blame the other driver, even if they've said at the start that it was their fault. So this is where it gets a bit tricky. I do want to do a quick plug for, I think, one of the best resources here at Legal Aid. It's Crashed Your Car. It pretty much talks about everything that I've talked about today. It's really easy to read. It goes through all the steps in a car accident. You can find it at pretty much every legal aid office out the front. Because the tricky part, and this is, I guess, where lawyers do come in, is if nobody wants to accept fault, then what do you do afterwards? I've helped a lot of clients send a letter of demand. Again, I try and ask the client if there's a way to negotiate rather than sending written letters demanding X amount of dollars, because it's quite formal, I think, and it's kind of your precursor to going to court. Generally, people will recommend that you send at least 2 letters to demand. I think probably if they're not going to respond to the first one, they probably won't respond to the second one, but you never know. It doesn't hurt to send 2. 3 is probably a bit overkill. But it's good to at least send a letter of demand, just to warn the other party that you might decide to take this to the local court and file a statement of claim if they don't respond to the letter of demand. Now, Google is a fantastic thing, but sometimes there's too much information on the internet. But I've always found with letters of demand, I think there are really good templates on the Law Access New South Wales website. There's different types of letters of demand. It's not something that a lawyer needs to help you with, but if you need some help, then I think Law Access is a really, really great resource. Now,
Joy, we've just had another comment from Giselle who told us about the car accident. Giselle had been contacted by both insurance companies of the cars involved, and they took a report and diagram from her to determine the result, because both drivers involved weren't as truthful as they needed to be to help the insurers work out the outcome.
that's fantastic of you. I think that's your public service being fulfilled there. I don't know many people who would, because those claims take really, really long, and dealing with insurance companies, not your own, is I take my hat off. So you've done a good deed, I think. Now, of course, if there's no insurers and both parties are uninsured, then they could consider, I think, going to court. I always say to my clients, court is a last resort. I know that sounds counterintuitive coming from a lawyer, but I genuinely do believe that. And that's because court costs a lot of money. If you are self-representing and you don't pay for a lawyer, it still costs you quite a bit of time. There are application fees for a statement of claim, and there's quite a lot of emotional stress. It's pulled out over 6 to 12 months, depending on what division you are in. So again, I always say to clients, if you can avoid court, please do. And in some circumstances, if there's a scratch to the car, that's only going to cost the client $500 to fix. I put it to them. I say, look, would you rather pay the $500? Yes, you're swallowing a bit of pride in not pursuing the other party. And yes, it technically should be paying for the damage if it is their fault, but do you want to have to turn up to the local court for the next few months? And most of my clients will say it's probably not worth it, and they will just pay for it themselves. But some clients still pursue it, irrespective of what my advice is. Now, just on the screen there, depending on the damage to the car, most claims for car insurance will be in the small claims division in the local court, because that's damages of up to $20,000. I haven't put all the information here on the slide about the actual process of the small claims division as well as the general division, but generally each of the parties will have one or two opportunities to mediate or negotiate beforehand before it actually goes to a hearing. I find in my experience that most parties will find a way to negotiate beforehand, but unfortunately some just go all the way to the end of the hearing. And I always say to clients, unfortunately, be prepared to lose. In the law, in the local court, it's a cost jurisdiction, which means if you lose, generally you have to pay the other lawyer's costs. And if they have appointed a lawyer that has costed them, $2,000 a day or more, then they will have to be prepared to not just pay their own lawyer, but also the other party's lawyers. So there's a lot of risk involved. And I find most of my clients will listen to me, but unfortunately not all. So something that I think I always have touched on throughout this presentation is, a lot of people don't have insurance. A scenario that I not always, but regularly see is my client has no insurance or just has CTP, and they are being chased by a very big insurance company who is demanding X amount of dollars. So insurance companies are regulated by standards in Australia, in New South Wales and Australia. So if somebody believes that they are being pursued too aggressively or too unethically, unconscionably by an insurance company, there's obviously a David and Goliath sort of complex scenario going on here. They are allowed to make a complaint to AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. This is only for claims up to $15,000 in damage, but it just, the way I see it, it puts the other insurer on notice that they can't bully our clients. And for my clients, most of them, don't have English as a first language, so it is really, really difficult for them to deal with, I think, with big insurance companies. So always keep this in mind. There's AFCA complaints available to keep insurance companies in check. Now we'll probably move on to our last section now, Bridget.
Yeah, I'll just launch the last poll. Okay, this question is, what is the penalty for going through a yellow light? So the choices are, there is no penalty, police pull you over and caution you, the penalty is $198 and 1 demerit point, or $457 and 3 demerit points.
I wonder what
This
people
is
will
another
answer
one I'll
this.
be interested to learn about. Okay, hopefully you've all had time to put your answer in, and I'll close that off and we'll share the results.
I hate to admit it, I was in the first category, the red category. There is no penalty for quite a few years. Turns out it's the last one. So 13% of you got it right. $457 and 3 demerit points. I know.
Wow.
I hadn't quite appreciated that it was an offence to drive through an amber light. But it is unfortunately there in the road rules, 2014 New South Wales. It's the exact same penalty as running a red light. I couldn't believe it when I found out. And that's because a client had come to me some years ago saying, "Oh, police have issued a fine to me incorrectly." And I said, "Oh, what fine is it?" She ran through an amber light. I said, "Oh, that doesn't seem right." I checked it. It was right. She had contested it at the local court and had lost, so she was looking to appeal it. I had to give her the advice that it was correct at the time of the offence. So I'll actually, sorry to be boring, I'll read the actual rule. So it's Rule 57, a driver approaching or at traffic lights showing a yellow traffic light must stop if there is a stop line at or near the traffic lights and the driver can stop safely before reaching the stop line. So it's as long as it's safe to stop. So if you're already fanging it through at 60 k's an hour and it's just turned yellow, then you probably will have to go through because you don't want to cause a car accident. But if you're traveling at a safe speed and you can stop, you are meant to stop. Of course, cameras probably won't pick it up. They will only pick up the red light camera. But if you've got a cop following behind you and they don't like you very much, they are allowed to issue you with that fine.
Wow, I could have gotten that fine last night. I drove through an amber light.
Look, it's quite normal practice because I think uh, in the community, you just think it's okay to run through an amber light.
Mm.
So once I found that out, I was like, I really need to stop trying to get through the yellow lights. You are meant to stop. Um, so yeah, just be aware, everybody. Um, I'll pop onto the next slide. So I mentioned before, of course, there's hundreds. I started the exercise of counting how many traffic offences were in New South Wales, but I realised I didn't have enough time. But I'm going to guesstimate about a couple of hundred at least. These are just the ones that I've chosen that I think happen to my clients quite often. Um, there are, of course, more, and some of these I just know from my clients' first-hand experience. I know what it's like. Um, so disobeying traffic signs there is just if there's a left-hand turn and you don't turn left. It's a lot of money, like $272 with 2 demerit points. Disobeying a give way sign is $464. Um, I kind of looked at a lot of these offences and I thought, that is an enormous chunk of money. How are you able to actually afford this if this happens? So um, I won't read them all out, but I will, I guess, give a shout out to the middle one drive with 4 unrestrained passengers. I only know this because one of my clients came in with this. He had 4 other fellows in the car with him, and nobody had a seatbelt. It was an enormous fine. Back then, he got 12 points, but I think it has reduced to 6 points in the last couple of years. But it was an enormous fine, and so he had come to me about how do I pay this fine in installments or how do I work it off. So that was a separate issue. Sorry, go
I
on, Bridget.
guess the other one, perhaps to just denote, is the using your mobile phone, because we're all often quite tempted to do that when we're in the car to respond to something. But 5 points, that's pretty steep in terms of demerit points, isn't it?
Oh, it's enormous. I remember. I mean, when I was a young lad, everybody kind of checks their phone from time to time. But I remember when the points got too high and the fine itself is massive. I genuinely tell myself I put my phone away. I don't need to check my phone. There's nothing that's that urgent to have to check my phone to have to pay that amount of money. I think to Services New South Wales. Um, and it's just good practice as well because if you have other passengers in the car, I think it sets a good example. I think.
Dewey, I'll just intervene. We've had a question, and I think we need to just clarify a question about the amber light offence. Does that apply in Western Australia? And if it's not clear to you, we're talking about the laws in New South Wales during this webinar. But what I guess we would suggest is that you need to check the road rules that apply in Western Australia to find out.
Yeah, across New South Wales, there are kind of guidelines, I think, on what types of rules there should be nationally, but each state has their own set of specific road rules. So I know um, another brother of mine got an offence for 6 kilometres over in Canberra, and it was a fine of $349, which is astronomical. 249, 349, something along those lines. So each state has their own penalties, their own demerit points, and how demerit points are distributed. So you'd probably have to check with WA, and WA kind of like to set their own unique set of rules, I think, with lots of jurisdictions. Um, one second, just let me check if there's anything else I need to cover with this. Oh, sorry, the last thing I wanted to mention with the New South Wales road rules is because there's so many, even when I was doing this presentation, a good way to check the offences is you can actually just search it on the newsouthwales.gov.au website. It's also linked in the Services New South Wales website. If you're bothered on a quiet afternoon, you can just look up how many demerit points, how many fines there are, or how big a fine is for certain offences. And that's pretty much the substantive material from my end. I just wanted to do a quick plug, I think, for our service here at Legal Aid, so not just Legal Aid, but kind of our refugee service. I mentioned at the start, we are a generalist service, which in plain English means we pretty much do anything that that comes up. But what we find we generally do most often is immigration, Centrelink, and sorry, I won't rattle off everything, but a lot of everyday civil problems and a lot of everyday family and crime problems as well. So there's only a few of us here in the state, but we really do put in the work to try and help our clients. We run about maybe 20 clinics a month and do a relative amount of litigation as well, which is just court work and tribunal work. And just on the last page, these are our contact details. If any community workers have clients who've resettled in Australia recently in the last 6 years, or any refugee clients in general, you can always inquire with us or send us an email to see if you can refer somebody over to our service.
Thank you, Doi. We'll just ask the audience whether there are any more questions that you'd like us to respond to about the topics that have been covered during the webinar today. I've learned a lot.
I hope I haven't put anyone to sleep. I know it can be a bit dry talking about law, but that's why we put in the polls to see if people can engage. And
it is a bit dry, but it's dry information that we all need to understand and know so that we don't get ourselves caught with those offences and demerit points unnecessarily. And like your brother, unintentionally not having registered the car and then receiving a quite large fine.
the amber light still throws me off. I still can't believe that's a
Oh,
rule, but here we are.
yeah, seems a bit harsh. And there was an audience member who commented that trucks often have to continue going because of the
Yep,
speed
exactly.
and the weight. It's difficult for them to stop within a short distance.
Yeah,
We've just had another comment from Giselle. I really found the insurance information very helpful, and I will be sharing this widely. Thank you.
no problem. If anybody does want slides, we'll probably distribute some slides afterwards. I guess only if it's requested, or at your discretion as well, Bridget.
Okay, sure. We'll have people's contact details from when they registered. So if anybody would like to receive a copy of the slides, let us know and we can send them by email. You'll receive an email after the webinar finishes with a survey, and we really welcome your feedback about this webinar and other topics that you might like to have legal information webinars on for you and your clients. And there will be the contact email address for the Community Legal Education branch in that email. So feel free to send through any questions that you think of after the webinar's finished, and we can share the slides with you via email as well. Doi, it looks like we don't have any audience questions, so we might finish up the webinar there, and people are free to email any questions that they think about later on. I think the information must have been clear enough.
Hopefully, it has been helpful. I just think there's so many traps. I think for clients and community members that hopefully it has been helpful for the community workers.
Well, you're getting lots of positive comments and people saying thank you and they appreciate the information, clear and well presented. So that's great.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thank you, Doi, and thank you to the audience. We'll end the webinar now and we'll share the slides by email after the webinar.